Hong's experiences in Hades. Hong Naipom was a military graduate born in the year AD 1561 and resided in the city of Pyongyang. He passed his examination in the year 1603, and in 1637 he attained the third degree. He was 82 years old in the year 1643, and his son San petitioned the king, requesting that his father be given a rank appropriate to his age. At that time, a certain Han Hongkil was the chief of the royal secretaries, and he refused to forward the request to his majesty. However, in the year 1644, when the crown prince was returning from his exile in China via Pyongyang, San seized this opportunity to present the same request to the crown prince. His Highness received it and brought it to the king's notice. Consequently, Hong received the rank of second degree. Upon receiving it, he said, "This year I shall die," and he died shortly after. In the year 1594, Hong fell ill with typhus fever, and after 10 days of suffering, he died. His body was prepared for burial and placed in a coffin. Then, the friends and relatives left, and his wife remained alone in charge. Suddenly, the body turned itself and fell with a thud to the ground. The woman, frightened, fainted, and the other family members rushed to her aid. From this time on, the body resumed its functions and Hong lived. He said, "In my dream, I went to a certain region, a place of great fear where many people were standing around and terrifying ogres, some of them wearing bulls' heads and some with faces of wild beasts. They crowded around and jumped and pounced towards me in all directions. A scribe dressed in black sat on a platform and addressed me, saying, 'There are 3 religions on earth: Confucianism, Buddhism, and Taoism. According to Buddhism, you know that heaven and hell are places that decide between man's good and evil deeds. You have always been a blasphemer of the Buddha and a denier of a future life, acting as though you knew everything, blustering and storming. You are now to be sent to hell, and 10,000 culpas will not see you out of it.' Then 2 or 3 constables armed with spears came and took me away. I screamed, 'You are mistaken, I have been wrongfully condemned.' Just at that moment, a certain Buddha, with a face of shining gold, approached me with a smile and said, 'There is indeed a mistake somewhere. This man must reach the age of 83 and become a second-degree officer before he dies.' Then, addressing me, he asked, 'How did you end up here?' The order was to arrest and bring a certain Hong from Chonju, not you. But now that you're here, take a look around before you leave and tell the world afterwards about what you've seen." Upon hearing this, the guards escorted me to a prison house where a sign marked "Stirrers of Strife" was posted. In this prison, I saw a large brazier-shaped pit, constructed of stones and filled with fire. Flames rose and tongues of fire forked. The stirrers of strife were brought forward and made to sit close to it. I then saw an infernal guard take a long iron rod, heat it until it was red hot, and use it to blind the guilty ones. I also saw that the offenders were hung up like dried fish. The guides accompanying me said, "While these individuals were on earth, they did not love their brethren but viewed others as enemies. They scoffed at God's laws and pursued only selfish gains, so they are being punished." The next hell was marked liars. In that hell, I saw an iron pillar several yards high with large stones placed in front of it. The offenders were summoned and made to kneel before the pillar. Then I saw an executioner take a knife, pierce the tongues of the offenders, pass an iron chain through each hole, and hang them from the pillar so that they dangled several feet from the ground by their tongues. A stone was then tied to each culprit's feet. With the stones weighing them down and the chains fastened to the pillar, their tongues were stretched out a foot or more, and their eyes rolled in their sockets. Their agony was horrifying. The guides once again said, "These offenders, when on earth, use their tongues skillfully to tell lies and to separate friends, and so they are being punished." The next hell was labeled deceivers. I saw numerous people there. Ogres were cutting flesh from their bodies and feeding it to starving demons. These demons continued to eat, and the flesh was continuously cut until only bones were left. When the winds of hell blew, their flesh regenerated. Then metal snakes and copper dogs swarmed in to bite them and suck their blood. Their screams of pain caused the earth to tremble. The guides told me, when these offenders were on earth, they held high office. They pretended to be honest and good while secretly accepting bribes and committing all kinds of evil. As state ministers, they exploited the resources of the land and drained the people's blood, yet they portrayed themselves as benefactors and received high praise. While they lived as thieves in reality, they pretended to be as holy as Confucius and Mencius. They deceived the world and were robbers, and so they are punished in this way. The guides then said, "It is not necessary for you to see all the hells." They decided to take me elsewhere to show me something, so we traveled some distance to the southeast. There was a large house with a sign that read, "The Home of the Blessed." As I looked, there were beautiful halos surrounding it and clouds of glory. There were hundreds of priests in cassocks and surplices. Some carried freshly bloomed lotus flowers, some sat in the posture of the Buddha, some were reciting prayers. The guides explained, these individuals, when on earth, kept the faith and served the Buddha with undivided hearts. Thus, they have escaped the 8 sorrows and the 10 punishments and are now in the home of the happy, which is called heaven. After we had seen all these things, we returned. The golden-faced Buddha asked me, not many on earth believe in the Buddha and few know of heaven and hell. What do you think of it? I bowed deeply and thanked him. Then the black-coated scribe said, I am sending this man away, see him safely off. The spirit soldiers escorted me, and while on the way, I woke up with a start and found that I had been dead for 4 days. Hong's mind swelled with pride because of this, and he often boasted about it. His age and second-degree rank came about just as the Buddha had predicted. Unfortunately, his experience was used as a means to deceive people, for the superior man does not speak of these strange and wonderful things. Yi Tan, a Chinese man from the Song Kingdom, used to say, if there is no heaven, there is no heaven, but if there is one, only the superior man can attain it. If there is no hell, there is no hell, but if there is one, the wicked man must inherit it. If we examine Hong's story, while it appears to be a tale to deceive the world, it is actually a story to inspire righteous action. I and Bang have recorded it like Toi Chi saying, don't criticize the story, but learn its lesson. In Bang.
Haunted houses. There was once a man named Yi Chang in Seoul who often recounted his own eerie experiences. Being poor and homeless, he frequently stayed in borrowed accommodations and sometimes even ventured into haunted houses. Once, when he couldn't find a place to stay, he heard about a haunted house in Inktown at the foot of South Mountain, which had been abandoned for generations. Curious, Chang decided to investigate and eventually decided to move in. To determine if the rumors of haunting were true, he invited his elder brothers, Hugh and Haw, along with several relatives to help clean the house and spend the night there. The house had an upper room that was securely locked. Peering through a crack, they saw a table with a stand, an old harp without strings, worn shoes, and various sticks and bits of wood, nothing else. The room was covered in thick dust as though untouched for many years. After drinking wine, the group played games around the table, staying awake through the night. Towards midnight, they suddenly heard harp music and a cacophony of voices, though the words were indistinct. It sounded like many people feasting and celebrating. Alarmed, someone thrust a sword through the partition into the locked room. Instantly, a blue blade appeared from the other side, startling them. Frightened, they decided not to disturb the place further. The harp music and revelry continued until morning. At daybreak, they left the house and never dared to return. In another part of the South Ward, there was another haunted house that Chang wanted to investigate. Again, he gathered his friends and brothers to see if it was truly haunted. Upon entering, they found 2 dogs on the veranda, one black and one tan, with fiery red eyes. Despite their shouting, the dogs remained still and silent. However, at midnight, the dogs suddenly got up and began howling at the sky in an ominous manner, jumping around the courtyard. Around that time, a figure dressed in ceremonial robes appeared. The dogs joyfully greeted him, and he sat on the veranda. Soon after, 5 or 6 colorful demons appeared and bowed before him in the open space. Then the man led the demons and the dogs around the house 2 or 3 times. They rushed onto the veranda and then back into the courtyard. Back and forth they came and went until finally they all mysteriously disappeared. The devils went into a hole underneath the floor, while the dogs went back to their quarters and lay down. The people in the inner room witnessed this. When daylight came, they examined the area and looked through the cracks in the floor, but they only saw an old worn-out sieve and a few discarded brooms. Behind the house, they found another old broom wedged into the chimney. They ordered a servant to gather them up and burn them. The dogs remained motionless all day long, neither eating nor moving. Some of the group wanted to kill the animals, but were afraid due to their frightening appearance. That night, they stayed again to see if the same phenomena would occur. At midnight, the 2 dogs again came down into the courtyard and began barking towards the sky. The man in ceremonial robes appeared once more, along with the devils, just as the previous day. The group, filled with fear and disgust, left the following morning and did not attempt it again. A friend, upon hearing Chang's story, went and asked Hugh and Haw about it, and they confirmed the tale. There is another story about a scholar who was homeless and sought shelter in a haunted house in Inktown. It was rumored to have a tower where mysterious sounds were heard. They opened the door, broke the window, removed an old harp, a spirit chair, shoes and sticks, and burned them. Before the fire was finished, one of the servants collapsed and died. The scholar, alarmed, extinguished the fire, returned the items, and left the house in fear and dismay. Another homeless man tried it as well. In the night, a woman in a blue skirt descended from the loft and behaved strangely and unnaturally. Seeing this, the man gathered his belongings and departed. In South Kettletown, several woodcutters passed behind a haunted house early one morning and found an old woman sitting under a tree, weeping. Thinking her to be an evil spirit, one man approached from behind and struck her with his sickle. The witch hurried back into the house, appearing to be only about 1 cubit and a span tall. One of Korea's most famous generals who fought on behalf of China in 1628 against the Manchus. He is worshipped today in many parts of Korea. When Mr. Im Kung-up was young, he lived in the town of Talai. In those days, he loved hunting and constantly practiced riding and hunting. Once, he went on an excursion to track deer in the Wallach Mountains. He carried only a sword and pursued the animal on foot. In his pursuit, he ventured as far as Tai Pike Mountain. Night overtook him there, and the way was obscured by darkness. There were gaping chasms, towering cliffs, and dense forests all around. In his confusion, he encountered a woodman and asked for directions and guidance. The woodman pointed him towards a cliff on the opposite side, saying, "There is a house over there." Mr. Im followed the woodman's advice and crossed over to the distant ridge. As he approached closer, he discovered a large tiled mansion standing alone, with no other houses nearby. He entered through the main gateway, but found the interior dark and deserted. Clearly, it was an abandoned house. After spending the whole day in the hills, Mr. Im was filled with apprehension and a sense of foreboding. He viewed the place suspiciously, fearing it might be inhabited by mountain goblins or forest spirits. Suddenly, someone opened a door and called out, "Are you planning to spend the night here? Have you eaten anything?" Mr. Im looked and recognized the woodman who had earlier directed him. He replied, "I have not eaten anything and I am hungry." The woodman then opened a hidden compartment and brought out wine and meat. Mr. Im, being extremely hungry, consumed everything. They then sat down together to talk, and after a while, the woodman stood up again, opened the compartment once more and retrieved a large sword. Mr. Im asked, "What is this sword for? Are you planning to harm me?" The woodman laughed and said, No. Tonight, there is something remarkable happening. Would you like to come with me and not be afraid?" Mr. Im replied confidently, "Of course I am not afraid. I want to see." It was around midnight then. The woodman, holding the sword, led Mr. Im to a side path through a series of gates that seemed endless. Eventually, they arrived at a place where lights shimmered on a pond. In the middle of the lake stood a tall pavilion, illuminated from within. Laughter and voices emanated from the upper floors. Through the sliding doors, Mr. Im could see 2 people sitting together. Nearby, there was another pavilion and a large tree beside it. The woodman instructed Mr. Im to climb the tree. "When you climb up," he said, "take your belt, tie yourself securely to the trunk, and remain perfectly still." Im obeyed his instructions, ascended the tree, and secured himself. From his elevated position, he watched attentively. The first sight that met his eyes was the woodman leaping across the lake and landing in the pavilion. Immediately, the woodman climbed to the upper floor, where Im could now discern 3 individuals engaged in conversation and laughter. After drinking, the woodman said to his companion, "We've made our wager. Now let's see it through." His companion replied, "Let's proceed." They both stood, approached the entrance, and leaped into the air, disappearing from view. All that could be heard were clashes of steel and flashes of light, continuing for some time. Observing this from his perch in the treetop, Im shuddered and felt his hair stand on end. He was at a loss for what to do. Moments later, he heard a loud thud and a cry of triumph, recognizing it as the woodman's voice. Chills ran down his spine and goosebumps covered his skin. It took him a long time to regain his composure. He climbed down from the tree where the woodman met him, swiftly took him under his arm, and leaped back into the pavilion. There he encountered a beautiful woman with hair like clouds. Before the conflict, her voice had been joyful, but now she was overwhelmed with sorrow and tears. The woodman spoke harshly to her, saying, "Do you not realize that your actions as a wicked woman have led to the death of a great man?" Turning to Im, he continued, "You possess courage and bravery, but it is insufficient for a world such as this. Therefore, I will give you this woman and this house. You may bid farewell to the outside world and live here in peace and tranquility for the rest of your days." Im replied, "What I witnessed tonight bewilders me. I would like to understand its meaning first. Please enlighten me, and then I will consider your offer." The woodman replied, "I am no ordinary mortal. I am an outlaw of the hills and forests, a robber who has acquired many such houses through unlawful means. Across all provinces, I possess numerous homes, each with a beautiful woman and abundant riches. Unexpectedly, this woman betrayed me for another man, and both of them attempted to kill me. Regrettably, I had to kill him in self-defense. Although I should have punished her as well, I am offering you this place and the woman. Will you take them off my hands?" Im inquired. "Who was this man, and where did he live?" "He had great potential," replied the woodman. "Though he lived humbly near the south gate of Seoul, selling tobacco, he visited here often. I was aware of this, but turned a blind eye until their attempt on my life forced my hand. It was never my intention to kill him." Here the woodman broke down in tears. "Alas, alas," he lamented, "I have ended the life of a remarkable and talented man. Consider carefully," he urged Im. "You have courage, but not enough to leave a mark on the world. The fates have decreed your failure halfway through. Abandon your futile ambitions. Your name will never achieve renown. Follow my advice, accept this woman and this home." Im shook his head and said, "However, I can't do it." The woodman asked, "Why can you not?" "If you do not, there is nothing for this woman but death. So here I'll have done with it." And he struck her with his sword and cut off her head. The next day he said to Im, "Since you are determined to go forth and do valiantly, I cannot stop you. But if a man goes forth thus and does not know the use of the sword, he is helpless and at the mercy of the foe. Stay with me a little and learn. I'll teach you." Im stayed for 6 days and learned the use of the sword. The magic invasion of SEOUL. One day, a gentleman from Seoul was crossing the Han River in a boat when he fell asleep and dreamed a remarkable dream. In his dream, he encountered a man with Gothic eyebrows and almond eyes, whose face was as red as ripened dates. This imposing figure, dressed in green with a long beard down to his belt, rode a red horse and carried a great sword by his side. The mysterious man instructed the gentleman to open his hand, upon which he marked it with a pen as a sign from the god of war. He warned him not to proceed directly to Seoul upon crossing the river, but to wait at the landing instead. Soon after, 7 horses loaded with network hampers would arrive, traveling towards the capital. The gentleman was to show the mark on his hand to the horsemen, causing them all to commit suicide in his presence. Then, he was to pile up the loads without looking into them and report the matter to the palace urgently, ensuring the contents were burned without delay. Upon waking, the gentleman found the mark on his hand exactly as in his dream, the ink still wet. He followed the instructions meticulously, waiting by the riverbank. True to the dream, the 7 loads arrived from the south, escorted by attendants and an official. As advised, he showed them the mark, prompting the official and his companions to leap into the river in panic. The gentleman then instructed the boatman to guard the hampers without opening or touching them, while he rushed to report the incident to the Board of War. Officials were dispatched to bring the loads into Seoul, where they were stacked high with wood and set ablaze. As the fire consumed the hampers, countless tiny figures of men and horses spilled out. The officials were horrified, realizing these were creations of a magician intended for a monstrous invasion of Seoul. Thanks to the warning from the god of war in the dream, disaster was averted. From then on, the people of Seoul faithfully made offerings to the god of war in gratitude for saving their city. Imbang. The awful little goblin. A nobleman in Seoul hosted a celebration, inviting all his family friends to a grand feast. The gathering was large, with many men and women in attendance. Suddenly, a disheveled, unpleasant-looking boy of about 15 appeared in front of the women's quarters. assuming he was a servant accompanying one of the guests. The host and other guests did not inquire about him. However, one of the female guests, seeing him in the inner quarters, sent a servant to scold him and demand he leave. The boy, however, stood unmoving, prompting the servant to ask, "Who are you? With whom did you come? How dare you enter the women's quarters and refuse to leave when asked?" The boy remained silent, steadfast as before, offering no response. The company grew puzzled, wondering whose guest he might be. Despite repeated inquiries, he gave no answer. The women became increasingly angry and ordered him forcefully out. They tried to push him out, but he stood as firm as a rock, utterly immovable. Frustrated, they informed the men. Upon hearing this, the men sent several strong servants to remove him, but still he did not budge. They demanded, "Who are you?" But received no reply. Frustrated and angered, they sent 10 men with ropes to bind him, but he remained as steadfast as a mountain, showing he could not be moved by human strength. One guest remarked, "Yet he is human. Why can't he be moved?" Finally, they sent 5 or 6 robust men with clubs to strike him forcefully. They struck with all their might, the noise echoing like thunder. However, the boy remained unmoved, not flinching in the slightest. The crowd began to fear, believing him to be more than human, perhaps a god. They all entered the courtyard and began bowing before him, like praying earnestly with joined hands. This continued for a long time. Finally, the boy gave a sarcastic smile, turned around, walked out through the gate, and disappeared. Terrified, the company canceled the feast. From that day onward, illness struck the household, affecting both host and guests. Those who scolded, bound with ropes, and struck him died within days. Others who attended the feast also fell ill and died from diseases like typhus. It was widely believed that the boy was the Tuluk spirit, though this cannot be confirmed. Truly strange indeed. Note, when a clan's time to disappear arrives, calamity befalls it. Even if a great spirit enters through the door during a feast, if guests had followed Confucius' advice to be reverent and distant, rather than insulting him and provoking his wrath, they might have been spared. Devils and humans were never meant to dwell together. Imbang. God's way. In a certain town, there lived a man of fierce and ungovernable disposition who, in moments of anger, used to beat his own mother. One day, after being subjected to such abuse, the mother cried out in agony, "O God, why do you not strike dead this wicked man who beats his mother?" After the beating, the son calmly strapped his sickle to his belt and slowly made his way to the fields, where he had agreed to help a neighbor reap buckwheat. The day was clear and serene, with a beautifully unobstructed sky. Suddenly, a small dark cloud appeared in the middle of the heavens, and soon after, the entire sky turned black. Thunder rumbled furiously, and rain poured down heavily. Villagers peered anxiously toward the field, where lightning bolts seemed to target a figure holding a raised sickle. Once the storm subsided, they ventured out to investigate and discovered the man who had mistreated his mother, now struck dead and torn apart. God takes notice of evildoers on this earth and administers justice accordingly. Let us be deeply mindful and reverent. Eerie. The perfect priest. There once was a priest named Namnu who had mastered the teachings of Buddhism. Whenever he owned clothing, he would willingly take it off and give it to those who were cold. His spirit was gentle without any rough edges. Everyone, whether high or low, rich or poor, called him by the nickname Softy. Whenever he saw someone sentenced to a flogging in the temple or the official yamen, Namnu would always beg to take the culprit's place. Once, during a grand function at Pagoda Temple, attended by many high officials, Softy was kneeling at the side, participating. He suddenly remarked to Prince Hong of Yonsan, "You are truly a great man." Hong replied, "What do you mean by great man, you impudent brat? Take that." And he boxed Softy's ear with his fist. Softy laughed and said, "Please, Hong, don't do that. It hurts. It hurts." Later, I was in the retinue of Prince Yi of Yunsong, with other high officials present, when we paused briefly near the temple. Softy was there, and he looked at Yi and said, "I know your face, but I have forgotten your name." Afterwards, he added, "Oh, I remember now. You are Yi Sokyong." The monastery priests who heard this familiarity were scandalized and rushed to apologize profusely to the prince, saying, "Softy is like this by nature. God made him so. Please, your excellency, forgive him." The prince pardoned him, and he was not disturbed. eerie, the propitious magpie. People say that when a magpie builds its nest directly south of a home, the master of the house will be promoted in office. Once, King Taizong had a friend who was very poor and had failed in all his projects. After various fruitless attempts, he decided to wait until the king went out on procession and then sent a servant to build an imitation magpie's nest in a favorable location ahead of him. The king noticed it and asked the man what he was doing. In response, the man explained that according to tradition, when a magpie builds its nest directly south of a home, the master of the house promptly receives a promotion. Since his master had waited so long without success, he was building an imitation nest to bring about the promotion. The king took pity on him and immediately ordered his appointment. When I was young, a magpie built its nest in front of our home, but myself and other boys cut off the branch, causing the entire nest to fall to the ground with the young birds, their pitiful yellow mouths open. Feeling sorry and afraid they would perish, I hung the nest on a propitious site to the south on a nudie tree. There, all the young birds survived, thrived, and eventually flew away. That same winter, my father was promoted 3 degrees in rank and assigned to the office of the Prime Minister. Later, I built a summer house at Chongpa, and in front of the house, directly facing south, magpies built a nest in a date tree. A woman slave of mine tore it down and used it for fuel, but the magpies returned the following year and built anew. The year after that, in 1469, Yezhong ascended the throne, and once again I received a promotion. In the spring of 1471, magpies built their nest in a tree just south of my office. I chuckled and remarked, "Surely there is a spiritual power in the magpie, as people have said since ancient times, and as I have personally witnessed." Eerie.